Who would sail such a shabby boat out to sea? The mocking laughter rang out from a nearby superyacht as they watched the lone woman on her old vessel. To them, she was nothing but an outcast among the glittering elite. But then a horn thundered, and a massive Navy warship appeared on the horizon, cutting through the waves straight toward her. To everyone's shock, the warship stopped, and hundreds of sailors stood at attention in salute as the simple woman rose to return the honor, leaving the entire marina in stunned silence. Her name was Rachel Carter, though nobody in that marina knew it yet. She stood alone on her weathered yacht, the paint chipped along the hull, the sails patched but steady. She wore a plain white dress, loose and unassuming, with a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the Mediterranean sun. The other boats around her screamed wealth, polished decks, glowing lights, music pulsing through the air. Rachel's boat didn't belong. Not here. Not among the super yachts with their champagne flutes and designer swimsuits. She didn't look the part either. No makeup, no jewelry, just a book in her hand and a quiet way about her. But the way she moved, the way she adjusted the sails with steady hands, said she wasn't lost. She knew exactly where she was. Years ago, she'd learned to tune out the noise. Growing up in a family that owned half the skyline in New York, Rachel had been raised with rules stricter than most. Her father, a man who could silence a boardroom with a glance, taught her discipline. Her mother, elegant but cold, drilled into her the importance of restraint. Never flaunt, her mother used to say, her voice sharp as she straightened Rachel's posture. Wealth is a tool, not a costume. So, Rachel learned to carry herself quietly, to let her actions speak. Even now, out here on the water, she could have been anyone. A drifter, a nobody. That's what they saw when they looked at her, and they didn't hold back. On the superyacht, a woman in a glittering gold bikini leaned against the railing, her sunglasses perched on her nose like a crown. She was maybe 35, her laugh sharp as she pointed at Rachel's yacht. "Look at that thing," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. It's like she dragged it out of a junkyard. The group around her snickered, their eyes darting to Rachel, waiting for a reaction. A man with a slick goatee, his shirt unbuttoned to show off a gold chain, chimed in. "Bet she's here to clean the boats, not sail one." Rachel's hands paused on the rope she was tying just for a moment, before she continued her movements, smooth, unbothered. The woman in the gold bikini smirked, raising her voice. "Hey, sweetheart, need directions to the service dock?" Rachel didn't look up. She just tightened the knot, her fingers steady, her silence louder than their words. "Hey, before we keep going, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to share these stories with you, to walk through these moments together." All right, let's get back to it. The super yacht closest to Rachel's boat was a floating palace, all glass and chrome, with a deck full of people who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. One woman, her hair swept into a perfect updo, leaned over the railing with a pair of binoculars. She was maybe 28, dripping in diamonds, her voice loud enough to carry across the water. "Who takes such a shabby boat out here?" she said, laughing as she passed the binoculars to her friend. The friend, a guy in a tailored linen shirt, smirked. "Probably rented it cheap off some travel app. Look at her dress. Did she borrow it from her grandma?" The group around them erupted, their voices sharp and careless, like they were tossing darts at a target they didn't expect to hit back. Rachel didn't look up. She sat cross-legged on the deck, her book open to a page she'd been reading for the last hour. The sun was dipping low, painting the water gold, and she turned a page with a slow, deliberate motion. A champagne bottle splashed into the sea near her yacht, thrown from the superyacht's deck. The group cheered, one guy shouting, "Oops, my bad," as if it were an accident. Rachel's eyes flicked to the bottle bobbing in the waves, then back to her book. She didn't flinch, didn't wave, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But her fingers tightened on the page just for a second before she turned it again. A young man in a bright pink polo shirt, his hair gelled to perfection, leaned over the superyacht's edge holding a cocktail. He was the kind of guy who posted every moment of his life online, desperate for likes. "Hey lady," he called, his voice dripping with fake pity. "You know, you're ruining the view, right? This place is for winners, not whatever you are." The crowd laughed, a few, clapping like he'd just delivered a punchline. Rachel set her book down. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. She stood brushing her dress smooth and looked at him. Not angry, not hurt, just looked. Winners," she said, her voice soft but clear. The word hung there simple, slicing through his bravado. He blinked, his cocktail glass tilting in his hand, and the laughter around him faltered. The marina was alive with noise music, laughter, the clink of glasses. Everywhere Rachel looked, people were performing for each other, showing off their wealth, their status, their perfect lives. A man in a silk shirt stood at the helm of another yacht shouting orders to a crew who scrambled to obey. He caught sight of Rachel and muttered something to the woman next to him, who laughed and shook her head. "She's probably lost," the woman said loud enough for Rachel to hear. "Somebody should tell her. This isn't the public beach." More laughter followed, sharp and mean, like they were all in on a joke Rachel wasn't allowed to understand. She adjusted her hat, pulling it lower over her eyes. Not to hide, but to focus. She leaned forward, checking the ropes on her deck. Her movements precise, practiced. The group on the super yacht kept going. A woman in a red dress, her nails painted to match, called out, "Honey, you sure you're in the right place? This isn't the discount dock." The others roared, and one guy raised his glass like he was toasting her humiliation. Rachel stood up, then brushing her hands on her dress. She didn't say a word, just looked at them, her gaze steady, unflinching. The woman in the red dress faltered, her smile slipping for a moment, but she recovered fast, turning to her friends with a forced laugh. A small crowd had gathered on another yacht, their phones out, filming Rachel like she was a sideshow. A woman with a fake tan and a designer handbag waved her hand dismissively. "She's probably some eco-warrior sailing that junk to make a statement," she said, her voice thick with sarcasm. "Save the planet, right?" The group snickered, but one man older with a yacht club badge pinned to his blazer leaned forward. "No statement here," he said loud enough for Rachel to hear. "Just someone who doesn't know her place." Rachel's hands paused on the helm, her fingers brushing the worn wood. She tilted her head just slightly and said, "My place." The question was quiet, but it carried, stopping the man mid-sip. He coughed, his face reddening, and turned away. Then it came, a low, booming horn from the horizon. Every head in the marina turned. A massive shadow cut through the waves, moving fast, too fast for a yacht. It was a Navy destroyer, gray and towering, its hull slicing the water like a blade. The super yacht rocked in its wake, their passengers gripping railings, spilling drinks. Confusion rippled through the crowd. "What's that doing here?" A man in a captain's hat muttered, his voice tight. "Some kind of patrol?" Another guessed. But there was an edge to his tone, like he didn't believe it. Rachel set her book down, her hands resting lightly on the helm. She looked out at the destroyer, her face calm, almost expectant. The group on the super yacht didn't let up. The woman with the updo, whose name was Lauren, according to the monogrammed towel draped over her chair, laughed louder now. "Oh great, the Navy's here to save the day. Too bad they're not here for her," she said, pointing at Rachel. The guy in the linen shirt, whose watch probably cost more than Rachel's boat, joined in. "If she waves, they'll think she's a beggar of the sea. Go on, wave, sweetheart." He waved his hand mockingly, and the others followed, their laughter sharp enough to cut. Rachel didn't move. She just stood there, her hands steady on the helm, her eyes fixed on the approaching ship. A deckhand from another yacht, young and cocky, his cap tilted back, shouted across the water, "Hey lady, don't get your hopes up. That ship's here for real, VIP's not you." His crewmates laughed, one slapping his back like he'd scored a point. Rachel's eyes flicked toward him just for a moment, and she tilted her hat back, letting the sun catch her face. VIPs, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. The deckhand's grin froze, his buddy's laughter trailing off. Something about her tone, the way she stood, made them shift uncomfortably. Lauren, watching from her yacht, muttered, "She's bluffing," but her voice lacked conviction. The destroyer's horn sounded again, closer now, and the air in the marina changed. People stopped laughing. The music on one yacht cut off mid-song. The warship slowed its engines, rumbling low, and then it stopped right in front of Rachel's little yacht. The crowd froze. A loudspeaker crackled to life, the voice clear and commanding, "Prepare to render honors." Gasps rippled through the marina. Lauren's binoculars slipped from her hands, clattering onto the deck. The guy in the linen shirt took a step back, his smirk gone. Rachel reached up slowly and removed her hat, setting it on the bench beside her. She stood straight, her shoulders squared, her face solemn but unshaken. Hundreds of sailors appeared on the destroyer's deck, their uniforms crisp, their movements synchronized. They turned as one, facing Rachel's yacht, and raised their hands in a salute. A trumpet sounded, its notes heavy, piercing, carrying across the water. The super yacht crowd stared, their mouths open, their drinks forgotten. The woman in the red dress, whose name was Vanessa, fumbled with her phone, snapping photos, but her hands were shaking. "This can't be right," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's nobody. She's gotta be nobody. Rachel didn't react to the stares. She just raised her hand to her forehead, returning the salute with a slow, deliberate motion. A woman on a nearby yacht, her hair streaked with highlights, and her wrists heavy with bracelets, whispered to her friend, "This is some kind of stunt, right? She paid them or something." Her friend, a man with a yacht-branded polo, nodded. "Yeah, no way this is real. She's playing us." But their voices were hushed, uncertain as the sailors held their salute. Rachel's yacht rocked gently in the destroyer's wake, and she steadied herself, her hand gripping the helm. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge their doubts. But when she adjusted her stance, the way her shoulders straightened said more than any words could. The crowd on the super yacht erupted, their voices a mix of disbelief and denial. A man with slicked back hair and a gold chain who'd been quiet until now leaned over the railing. "Impossible," he shouted. "How could a nobody get a salute like that? They've got the wrong boat." Laura nodded, her face pale. "It's a mistake. Has to be. They thought she was someone else." The guy in the linen shirt forced a laugh, but it came out thin, nervous. "It's just protocol, right? They salute anything that moves out here." But the sailors didn't waver. They held their salute, their faces serious, their eyes locked on Rachel's yacht. A Navy officer stepped to the edge of the destroyer's deck, a megaphone in his hand. His voice boomed across the water, clear and final. "We salute Admiral Rachel Carter, former commander of the Mediterranean Fleet." The marina went silent. Lauren's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the deck. Vanessa's phone dropped into her lap. The man with the gold chain turned away, muttering under his breath. Rachel stood still, her hand lowering from her salute, her expression unchanged. But her eyes, those eyes that had been so quiet, so steady, held a flicker of something. Pride maybe, or sorrow. Nobody could tell. Years ago, Rachel had walked the decks of that very destroyer. She'd been 29, the youngest commander in the fleet's history. Her uniform pressed her orders sharp. She'd stood in briefing rooms, her voice steady, as she directed ships through storms, through conflicts, through moments when one wrong call could have cost lives. Back then she'd been a force respected, feared, untouchable. But the weight of it, the endless decisions, the lives on her shoulders, had worn her down. She'd retired at 32, trading her stars for solitude, her warship for this small patched-up yacht. She wanted peace. She wanted to be ordinary. But the world, it seemed, wasn't ready to let her go. A young woman on another yacht, her face half hidden by oversized sunglasses, clutched a tablet, scrolling frantically. "Rachel Carter," she muttered, reading from a search. "It's true. She led a rescue mission, in 18 saved the whole crew." Her voice was loud enough to carry, and heads turned. The man next to her, his face red from too much sun or too much wine, scoffed. "So, what?" "She's done now. Living like a hermit doesn't make you special." Rachel overheard her hands pausing as she adjusted a sail. She didn't respond. Just let the rope slide through her fingers, her movements slow like she was savoring the feel of it. The young woman with the tablet looked away, her fingers hovering over the screen, unsure. The crowd on the super yacht didn't know what to do with themselves. The man in the linen shirt, whose name was Ethan, tried to laugh it off. "No way," he said, his voice loud but shaky. "The young woman like her. An admiral. Come on, she's probably some kind of fraud." Vanessa nodded, her fingers scrolling through her phone, already typing out a caption, "Fake admiral on a junk boat." Lauren, though, stayed quiet, her eyes darting between Rachel and the destroyer. She clutched her towel, her knuckles white. The man with the gold chain, who someone called Marcus, muttered, "Even if it's true, she's a quitter." Dropped out, ran away. Some hero. His voice was bitter, like he needed to tear her down to feel steady again. Rachel didn't respond. She didn't need to. She stepped to the edge of her yacht, her movements slow, deliberate, and adjusted a rope on the deck. The gesture was small, but it carried weight, like she was saying without words that she didn't owe them anything. The destroyer's crew began to lower a small boat into the water, and the crowd watched, their whispers dying out. The boat carried a wooden chest, polished and heavy, its edges carved with naval insignia. 2 sailors rowed it to Rachel's yacht, their strokes steady, respectful. When they reached her, one of them stood saluting again before handing the chest over. As the sailors rowed back, a man in a tailored suit, his yacht docked a few spaces away, leaned over his railing. He was older, his hair graying, his voice polished, but cruel. "What's in the box, huh? Some kind of participation trophy?" His friends chuckled, but it was forced, their eyes uneasy. Rachel didn't look at him. She knelt beside the chest, her fingers tracing the carved insignia, her face unreadable. The man pressed on louder now. "Come on, open it. Let's see what the Navy gives a nobody." Rachel's hands stilled. She looked up, her gaze locking onto his, and said, "It's not for you." Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air, and the man's smile vanished, his friends shifting awkwardly behind him. Rachel opened the chest slowly, her hands careful, almost reverent. Inside was an admiral's flag folded with precision, its stars glinting in the sunlight. Next to it a ceremonial sword, its hilt worn but proud, and a letter sealed with the Navy's crest. She didn't read it aloud. Didn't need to. The officer on the destroyer lifted his megaphone again. "The fleet still owes you gratitude," he said, his voice carrying over the waves. "Without you, we would not exist today." The crowd on the super yacht went still. Some looked away, their faces flushed. Others stared at Rachel, their mouths open like they were seeing her for the first time. A woman on a nearby yacht, her dress sparkling with sequins, tried to salvage her pride. "Big deal," she said, her voice high-pitched, nervous. "She's still out here alone playing sailor. Doesn't prove anything," but her words fell flat, swallowed by the weight of the moment. Rachel stood holding the letter, her fingers brushing the seal. She didn't open it, just tucked it into the chest and closed the lid. The gesture was final, like shutting a door on their doubts. The woman in sequins turned away. Her face flushed, her friends pretending not to notice. A reporter on another yacht, a press badge pinned to her sharp suit, pushed through the crowd to get a better view. She shouted across the water, her voice cutting through the silence. "If you really were an admiral, why did you leave? Why not keep leading?" The question hung in the air, heavy, accusing. Others picked it up, their voices rising. "Yeah, why live out here alone?" Vanessa called, her tone sharp, like she was trying to claw back some control. "If you're such a big deal, why hide?" Marcus crossed his arms, smirking. Sounds like she couldn't hack it. Abandon her duty. The marina felt like a courtroom, every eye on Rachel, waiting for her to crack. Before Rachel could speak, a low hum cut through the air. A sleek black car pulling into the marina's lot. Heads turned, and a man stepped out, his suit understated but sharp, his presence commanding. He didn't rush, didn't shout, just walked toward the dock where Rachel's yacht was moored. The crowd parted, their whispers fading. He was her husband, though nobody knew it yet. His steps were steady, his eyes fixed on Rachel. When he reached the edge of the dock, he stopped, his hands in his pockets, and just looked at her. Rachel's fingers brushed the helm, a small smile flickering on her face, gone as quickly as it came. The reporter's voice faltered, but she pressed on, her tone less certain now. "So, what, you just ran away? Left everyone behind?" Rachel's husband tilted his head, his gaze shifting to the reporter. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The way he stood, the way the air seemed to shift around him, said enough. Vanessa lowered her phone, her hands trembling. Ethan took a step back, his cocktail glass empty now. Forgotten. Lauren's towel slipped to the deck, her face pale. Rachel looked at her husband, then back at the reporter. "I fulfilled my duty," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the water. "Now I want to learn how to live as an ordinary person." The officer on the destroyer nodded, his face solemn. "To us," he said, "you will always be Admiral." The sailors erupted, their voices rising in a unified roar, their salute crashing across the waves like thunder. Rachel raised her hand one last time, returning the gesture, her face calm, but her eyes bright with something unspoken. Her husband stepped onto her yacht, his movements quiet, unhurried. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just stood beside her, his presence shifting the weight of the moment. The crowd watched, silent now, their mockery swallowed by the truth. A young couple on a nearby yacht, their faces flushed with embarrassment, turned away, whispering to each other. "We didn't know," the woman said, her voice barely audible. Her partner nodded, his eyes on Rachel's yacht. "She didn't even fight back," he said, almost to himself. Rachel's husband glanced at them, his expression unreadable, and they fell silent. Rachel adjusted her sails, her hands steady, her focus on the horizon. The couple's whispers faded, their phones tucked away, their bravado gone. The marina stayed quiet as Rachel closed the chest, her fingers lingering on the lid. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge their stares. She just turned to her sails, adjusting them with the same steady hands that had once commanded a fleet. The destroyer began to move, its engines rumbling as it pulled away, but the sailors remained on deck, watching her until the ship was a speck on the horizon. The super yacht crowd didn't know where to look. Lauren stared at the deck, her towel crumpled in her hands. Ethan muttered something under his breath. But his voice was gone, swallowed by the moment. Vanessa's phone was still in her lap, her post unsent. The next day the story broke. Headlines screamed across the internet. A simple woman on a yacht brought a warship to a standstill in salute. News outlets scrambled to dig up Rachel's past, her commands, her victories, the lives she'd saved. The reporter who'd shouted at her published a piece, her tone softer, now almost apologetic. Admiral Rachel Carter, it read, chose peace over power, but her legacy follows her. Social media lit up, people sharing photos of her yacht, her salute, the chest. The comments poured in, some in awe, some in disbelief, but all of them talking about her. Lauren didn't show up at the marina the next day. Word spread that she'd been let go from her family's company, her father citing embarrassing conduct after her behavior went viral. Ethan's sponsorship deal with a yacht brand fell through, the company quietly distancing itself after his comments hit the news. Vanessa's post, the one calling Rachel a fake admiral, was deleted, but not before screenshots spread, her followers dropping by the thousands. Marcus tried to laugh it off at a yacht club dinner, but nobody joined in. His friends stopped inviting him out. The consequences weren't loud or dramatic. They were just there, like the tide coming in, steady and inevitable. A week later, a small article surfaced, buried in a local paper. It mentioned a donation to a veterans charity, anonymous but traced to a trust linked to Rachel's family. The amount was staggering enough to fund a new program for retired sailors. Nobody in the marina connected it to her, but those who'd seen her that day might have guessed. Rachel didn't sail for attention, didn't live for applause. She had given her orders, carried her weight, and walked away. The world could keep its headlines. She didn't need them. Rachel didn't stay to watch it unfold. She sailed out that evening, her yacht cutting through the waves as the sun sank low. The marina was quieter now. The super yacht still docked, their lights dimmer than before. She didn't look back. Didn't need to. Her silence, her presence had said enough. The chest sat on her deck, a reminder of who she'd been. But her hands were on the helm, guiding her forward. She was free, not from her past, but from the need to prove it. The water stretched out before her, endless and open. She adjusted her hat, her fingers brushing the brim, and checked the horizon. The world had seen her now, but she didn't owe it anything more. She'd done her duty, carried her weight, and walked away whole. For those who'd been judged, dismissed, or silenced, her story wasn't just a story. It was a mirror, a quiet nod, a hand on the shoulder saying, "You aren't wrong. You are never alone." Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.